The day you discover your greatest enemy has been saving your life is the day everything you believed begins to fall apart. Princess Valus did not remember the crash. She remembered the warning. Every child of the Asterian Dominion learned the same lesson before they could even read the stars. Never trust a human. Humans smiled before they conquered. Humans healed only to control. Humans welcomed strangers only because they wanted obedient servants tomorrow. The lesson had been repeated so many times that it no longer sounded like history. It sounded like truth. That truth shattered the moment she opened her eyes. Soft white light greeted her instead of interrogation lamps. A quiet, rhythmic beeping echoed somewhere beside her, steady as a heartbeat. Cool air drifted gently across her face, carrying the clean scent of antiseptic, fresh linen, and something strangely comforting that reminded her of rain on polished stone. Her vision blurred before slowly sharpening into an unfamiliar ceiling painted with warm morning light spilling through a wide window. She instinctively tried to sit up, but a dull ache spread through her shoulders, encouraging patience instead of panic. Thin, transparent medical lines rested against her arm. Small monitors displayed symbols she did not recognize. None of them resembled military equipment. None looked threatening. She turned her head cautiously. Her breath caught. A human was sitting beside her bed. No, sleeping beside her bed. His head rested against folded arms on the edge of a chair that looked far too uncomfortable for anyone intending to stay very long. Dark blonde hair fell slightly across his forehead. Light stubble framed a tired face that seemed older than his years. One sleeve of his blue rescue uniform had been rolled to the elbow, revealing faint scars earned through work rather than combat. A hospital identification badge hung loosely from his chest. Nathan Cole, Emergency Aerospace Rescue Division. The words meant little to Valus, but the exhaustion written across his face needed no translation. He had clearly not slept properly in hours, perhaps longer. Her pulse quickened. This had to be deception, a carefully designed performance. She quietly examined the room for hidden cameras, armed guards, reinforced doors, anything that matched the stories she had memorized since childhood. Instead, she found flowers resting on a nearby table. Someone had placed a small handwritten card beside them. She could not read the language, but a simple drawing of a smiling sun decorated one corner. Beside the flowers stood a tiny stuffed bear wearing a miniature hospital gown. It looked almost ridiculous. Why would prisoners receive toys? Her confusion deepened. A faint movement escaped her before she could stop it. Nathan lifted his head immediately, not with aggression, not with suspicion, simply with relief. His tired blue eyes widened as they met hers. For one long second, neither of them spoke. Then a warm smile appeared, quiet and genuine, as though he had been hoping for this exact moment all night. "Good morning," he said softly, careful not to startle her. "Welcome back." His voice carried no triumph, no hostility, only kindness wrapped in exhaustion. Valus stared without answering. Every instinct told her silence was safer. Nathan seemed to understand. He slowly reached toward a nearby pitcher instead of approaching her. He poured a glass of water, placed it within easy reach, and stepped back, giving her more space than necessary. "You do not have to talk yet," he said. "The doctor said you might wake up confused. Take your time. You are safe here." Safe. The word echoed louder than every machine in the room. Safe? With humans? That single sentence contradicted an entire lifetime of education. She searched his face for satisfaction, manipulation, or hidden cruelty. She found none. Outside the large window, the morning sun climbed higher above an unfamiliar city skyline. Helicopters crossed peacefully between distant buildings. Birds landed briefly on the hospital garden below before lifting effortlessly into the bright blue sky. Everything looked impossibly ordinary. If humanity truly ruled through fear, why did their hospitals sound so peaceful? Why did strangers leave flowers for someone from another world? Why was the human who supposedly hated her people sleeping in an uncomfortable chair instead of celebrating a captured enemy? Nathan quietly noticed her eyes drifting toward the window. "Beautiful morning," he said with a small smile. "You picked a good day to wake up." Valus had no answer. Somewhere deep inside her, the first crack appeared in a wall that had taken 24 years to build, and for the first time in her life, she wondered whether the greatest lie in the galaxy had never been about humans at all. Ironically, The first thing Princess Valus expected from a human was a question, an accusation, or a demand. Instead, she received breakfast. The gentle rattle of a serving cart rolled through the hallway before a nurse stepped quietly into the room, carrying a warm tray. Steam rose from a bowl of vegetable broth beside fresh bread, sliced fruit, and a clear glass of water. The nurse smiled at Nathan before glancing toward Valus with the same expression she might have offered any ordinary patient. "Good morning," she said warmly. "How is our guest feeling today?" Valus studied the woman carefully. There was no fear in her eyes. No resentment, only professional concern. Nathan stood and stretched his stiff shoulders before thanking the nurse. He accepted the tray and carefully adjusted the small table beside the bed. Every movement was slow enough that it would not startle her. He never reached toward her without allowing her to see his hands first. Even that simple habit surprised her. Soldiers preparing to capture someone did not behave with such patience. "You have probably been asleep for almost 30 hours, Nathan explained in a calm voice. "Your body needs time to recover. There is no rush." Recover. Another unexpected word. In every military briefing Valus had attended, captured officers disappeared into interrogation centers within hours. Nobody mentioned hospitals. Nobody mentioned warm soup. Her golden eyes followed Nathan as he carefully arranged the meal. He noticed her hesitation almost immediately. Without saying a word, he picked up the spoon, tasted the broth himself, and smiled. "Not too hot," he said. "You should not burn your tongue." He set the spoon back down and stepped away again. The simple gesture left Valus speechless. He had eaten first, not because he was hungry, but because he wanted to reassure her that nothing had been hidden inside the food. Such consideration had never appeared in any historical record she had studied. Silence filled the room once more. Outside the window, sunlight reflected across nearby glass buildings while distant ambulance sirens drifted softly through the city before fading into the morning air. Somewhere farther down the hallway, a child laughed. Another patient thanked a doctor. The sounds blended into a peaceful rhythm unlike anything inside a military installation. Finally, Valus spoke. Her voice sounded weaker than she expected. "Why?" Nathan looked up. "Why what?" She searched for the right words. "Why am I here?" Nathan answered without hesitation. "Because your shuttle crashed near one of our orbital rescue corridors. Your emergency beacon was broadcasting on a civilian rescue frequency recognized by every member of the Interstellar Medical Accord. My rescue team was the closest unit, so we responded." She frowned. "You knew I was not human." "Yes." "You still rescued me." "Of course." His answer arrived so naturally that it almost irritated her. There had been no dramatic speech, no declaration of honor. He spoke as though saving a stranger required no explanation at all. Seeing the confusion on her face, Nathan continued. "International rescue law is simple. If someone is in immediate danger, we save them first. Questions come later." Valus remained silent. "But how can your doctors treat my species?" Nathan glanced toward the medical monitor beside her bed. "This hospital has a department of xenomedicine. Earth has cared for visitors from many civilizations for decades. We do not know every detail about every species, but our physicians work with shared interstellar medical databases and adaptive diagnostic systems. They knew enough to stabilize you until your body could begin healing on its own." Valus stared at him, trying to decide whether she believed him. Everything sounded remarkably ordinary, not like a secret military project, but like a routine hospital procedure. After another quiet moment, she asked, "Who is paying for all of this?" Nathan smiled gently. "Nobody asks about payment while someone is fighting to stay alive. Emergency treatment always comes first. The governments can sort out the paperwork after the patient is safe." Those words unsettled her almost as much as the rescue itself. Back home, identity determined nearly every decision before help was ever offered. Here, survival appeared to come before politics. "You are our enemy," she whispered. Nathan rested one hand lightly against the back of the chair before answering. "Actually, I have never met you before yesterday." Valus blinked. "Our governments disagree about many things," he continued. "That does not automatically make you my enemy." Those words unsettled her more deeply than any threat could have. She stared at him, trying to detect hidden strategy beneath his calm expression. "Do you know who I am?" she asked quietly. Nathan smiled with a hint of embarrassment. "Honestly, not yet." The medical team was more interested in stopping your fever than checking your biography. She almost laughed before catching herself. Nobody had recognized the crest woven into the silver fabric folded neatly beside the bed. Nobody had bowed. Nobody had demanded favors. Nobody even seemed curious about her social status. For the first time since opening her eyes, she realized something even stranger than human kindness. Inside this hospital, she was not being treated like an alien. She was not being treated like royalty. She was simply being treated like a person, and that quiet realization lingered in her thoughts long after Nathan stepped into the hallway to give her a few peaceful minutes alone. The following afternoon, sunlight poured through the hospital's towering glass atrium, scattering warm reflections across polished floors where footsteps blended with quiet conversations and the distant hum of medical equipment. Princess Valus stood beside the wide observation window, her strength slowly returning as she leaned lightly against the railing. The doctors had encouraged her to walk short distances, and although every careful step reminded her that her body was still healing, she welcomed the chance to leave the quiet isolation of her room. Nathan walked several feet beside her rather than directly next to her, never crowding her space, never making her feel watched. It was another small detail she had begun to notice. Humans here seemed to understand invisible boundaries without needing to discuss them. As they entered the central corridor, Valus instinctively slowed. The place looked nothing like the detention facilities described in the Dominion archives. Families gathered around waiting areas with cups of coffee. Elderly patients smiled as volunteers delivered fresh flowers. Medical robots quietly carried supplies beside physicians from several different worlds wearing the same white coats and sharing the same conversations. One doctor with silver skin laughed warmly with a human surgeon while reviewing a holographic scan. Nearby, a child with soft amber eyes chased a small floating therapy drone that projected colorful butterflies across the ceiling. His mother apologized for the noise. Instead of becoming irritated, a nurse laughed and released 2 more holographic butterflies to join the game. As Valus continued forward, a hospital security officer briefly looked in her direction with quiet caution. His hand rested near his communication device out of habit rather than fear. Nathan noticed the glance and simply said, "She is one of our patients." The officer gave a respectful nod without another question and returned to greeting visitors entering the lobby. Valus quietly observed the exchange. No hostility, no whispers, only professional awareness followed by ordinary courtesy. "This hospital treats more than humans," Nathan explained after noticing where she was looking. "Earth has welcomed visitors from many systems for decades. Most people have met someone from another world before. Some are curious, some are cautious. But once you become a patient, everyone here follows the same rule." "What rule?" she asked. Nathan smiled gently. "The person comes before the species." She followed his gaze toward a rehabilitation room separated by transparent glass. Inside, an elderly alien whose crystalline skin shimmered. Like frozen water practiced walking with the assistance of a human therapist. Every successful step earned patient encouragement rather than frustration. Across the room, another therapist adjusted the mechanical arm of a young human, while an alien engineer carefully recalibrated the device. No one appeared superior. No one seemed excluded. Everyone simply worked together. "They trust each other," Valus whispered almost to herself. Nathan smiled. "Most of them met only this week." The answer settled heavily inside her thoughts. Trust without shared bloodlines. Cooperation without shared planets. Such ideas had always been dismissed as impossible back home. They continued walking until they reached a small indoor garden filled with green plants, flowing water, and quiet benches surrounded by sunlight. The gentle sound of the fountain softened every conversation nearby. A little girl, no older than 6, noticed Valus standing uncertainly near the entrance. She tugged gently on her mother's sleeve before pointing toward the unfamiliar visitor. Her mother looked at Valus, then at Nathan, who offered a reassuring smile. "Would it be all right if Emily says hello?" she asked politely. Valus looked toward Nathan, unsure how to respond. He simply nodded encouragingly without speaking for her. "Yes," Valus answered softly. The little girl walked over with careful excitement instead of running. She held a box of colored pencils and a folded sheet of paper. "Hi," she said brightly. "Are you feeling better?" "I believe so," Valus answered carefully. The little girl smiled as though that was wonderful news. She offered the drawing with both hands. It showed a bright blue sky, smiling flowers, and two stick figures standing beneath a large yellow sun. One figure had long silver hair. The other wore a blue rescue uniform. Above them, written in uneven handwriting, were the words, "Friends get better together." "I made it this morning," the little girl explained proudly. "Mom says pictures help people smile." Her mother thanked Velas for being kind before leading her daughter toward the rehabilitation wing. The little girl waved one last time before disappearing around the corner. Velas stared at the drawing resting in her hands. Nobody had asked her rank. Nobody had questioned her loyalty. A child who knew nothing about ancient conflicts had seen only someone recovering in a hospital. Nathan glanced toward the colorful picture and quietly said, "Around here, kindness spreads faster than rumors." Velas looked once more across the bustling hospital where humans and aliens moved together beneath the same roof, sharing hope instead of suspicion. And for the first time, she found herself wondering whether the greatest strength of humanity had never been their technology at all, but their remarkable ability to treat complete strangers as though they already belonged. By the fourth morning, the hospital no longer felt like a prison to Princess Velas. That realization frightened her more than anything she had experienced since arriving on Earth. She stood alone beside the wide window in her room, watching soft clouds drift across an endless blue sky, while the city below awakened with quiet purpose. Emergency aircraft crossed the horizon with graceful precision. Public gardens slowly filled with people carrying coffee, walking dogs, and greeting complete strangers with casual smiles. It looked impossibly peaceful. Too peaceful. Every lesson she had memorized insisted this calm was an illusion carefully designed to deceive outsiders. Her fingers tightened around the folded drawing the little girl had given her the previous afternoon. "Friends get better together." Such innocent words should not have carried so much weight, yet she had read them at least 20 times since returning to her room. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Nathan stepped inside carrying a small tablet and a neatly folded light gray jacket. "The doctors approved a longer walk today," he said with an encouraging smile. "Only if you feel ready." Velas hesitated before accepting the jacket. "You trust me enough to leave the room?" Nathan looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "You are recovering, not serving a sentence." Once again, his answer arrived without hesitation, as though there were no other reasonable response. They left the patient wing together and entered a quiet courtyard surrounded by flowering trees and shallow reflecting pools. Soft wind stirred the leaves overhead while sunlight shimmered across the water. Several patients rested on benches reading books or talking with family members. Nobody stared at Velas. Nobody whispered about the unfamiliar visitor walking among them. Nathan pointed toward a winding stone path that circled the garden. "The physical therapists like this route," he explained. "Fresh air helps people heal." They walked in comfortable silence until Velas finally spoke. "Yesterday you said your governments disagree with mine." Nathan nodded. "Sometimes." "Then why does nobody here seem afraid of me?" Nathan considered the question carefully before answering. "Fear is understandable. Judging someone you have never met is a choice." She lowered her eyes. "Back home, we were taught that humans are dangerous because they smile while hiding their true intentions." Nathan smiled softly at the irony. "My grandmother used to say something similar about people who sold used cars." Velas looked at him in confusion for a heartbeat before realizing he had made a joke. A quiet laugh escaped her before she could stop it. It surprised both of them. Nathan laughed as well, not because the joke was especially clever, but because hearing her laugh felt like proof that she was beginning to recover in more ways than one. The sound faded into another peaceful silence. Nearby, an elderly man carefully scattered birdseed along the edge of the garden. Small birds gathered around his feet without hesitation. A young alien woman wearing a rehabilitation brace joined him, smiling as the birds hopped between them with equal trust. The old man offered her half of the remaining seed without saying a word. She accepted with gratitude. Neither seemed concerned that they had come from different worlds. They simply enjoyed the quiet morning together. Velas watched the simple scene with growing disbelief. "Does this happen often?" she asked. "Every day," Nathan answered. "Most people are too busy living their lives to spend all day hating strangers." His words lingered as they reached the end of the path. Before turning back, Nathan stopped beside a polished stone engraved with a simple inscription at the entrance to the garden. Healing begins when fear ends. There were no names beneath the sentence. No flags. No symbols of any nation or planet. Only those 5 words reflecting gently in the morning sunlight. Velis read them several times. They sounded less like a slogan and more like a quiet promise. As they walked back toward the hospital entrance, she realized something that unsettled her even more than the kindness surrounding her. Every hour she spent beside Nathan made it harder to remember why she had ever believed humans deserved her fear, and somewhere beyond the peaceful garden walls, the beliefs she had carried her entire life were beginning to crumble one quiet act of compassion at a time. Ironically, the place that finally changed Princess Velis was not a palace, a battlefield, or a diplomatic chamber. It was a quiet hallway filled with photographs. 2 days later, her strength had improved enough that the medical staff encouraged longer walks throughout the hospital. Nathan arrived after finishing an early rescue briefing, carrying 2 paper cups filled with warm tea instead of coffee after remembering she had politely declined the bitter drink before. "I guess this might be closer to what you like," he said with an uncertain smile. Velis accepted the cup carefully. The fragrant steam carried delicate notes of citrus and wild herbs. She took one small sip before looking at him with quiet surprise. "It is very good." Nathan grinned. Lucky guess. They wandered through another wing of the hospital she had not visited before. Unlike the busy treatment floors, this corridor remained almost silent. Soft golden lights illuminated polished wooden walls lined with hundreds of framed photographs stretching farther than she could immediately see. Some pictures showed smiling doctors beside grateful families. Others captured rescue aircraft landing during storms, medical teams carrying supplies into isolated communities, or volunteers comforting frightened children wrapped in warm blankets. Every photograph carried a small brass plate beneath it, with a date and a few carefully engraved words. Velis slowed her pace. "What is this place?" Nathan's voice became softer. "The Hall of Service." She looked from one picture to another. "They are famous?" "Not exactly." He stopped before one particular photograph showing a gray-haired physician kneeling beside an elderly alien whose crystalline skin reflected the afternoon sun. Most people outside this hospital have never heard their names. Velis studied the image. The doctor was smiling with complete sincerity. The elderly patient was holding his hand. "Then why display them?" Nathan answered without looking away from the photograph. "Because they remind us why we are here." They continued walking. Another frame showed emergency responders sharing blankets during a blizzard. Another captured surgeons from 4 different worlds standing shoulder to shoulder after completing an operation that had lasted nearly 18 hours. There were no medals, no military decorations, no speeches celebrating victory, only ordinary people who had quietly chosen compassion. Velis eventually stopped before a larger photograph near the end of the corridor. It showed an exhausted rescue team sitting together on the floor after what appeared to have been a long mission. Their uniforms were stained with dust and rainwater. Some were human, others clearly were not. They looked equally tired, equally relieved, equally alive. Nathan recognized the picture immediately. "That mission happened 6 years ago," he said. "A passenger transport lost power near one of Jupiter's colonies." Velis noticed a familiar face among the group. "You were there." Nathan smiled awkwardly. "I was younger." "You look exactly as tired." He laughed quietly. "That part has not changed." She read the inscription beneath the frame. "Rescue completed. 147 lives returned home. No casualties." Her eyes lingered on the final 3 words. "No casualties." "How many were human?" she asked. Nathan shrugged gently. "I honestly do not remember." She looked at him, certain she had misunderstood. "You never counted?" "It was never important." His answer came so naturally that she almost forgot to breathe. Back home, every report began by separating citizens from foreigners before discussing anything else. Here, the first number that mattered was simply how many people had been saved. They reached the final display at the end of the hall. Unlike the photographs, it contained no people at all. Behind clear glass rested an old rescue helmet scratched by years of service. Beside it lay a faded note written in careful handwriting. Nathan read it aloud, almost from memory. "The measure of civilization is not how it treats its strongest citizens, but how it protects complete strangers who may never be able to repay the kindness. Silence settled gently around them. The words echoed inside Velis with unexpected force. She suddenly understood why this hospital felt different from everything she had ever known. Humanity did not preserve these memories to celebrate heroes. They preserved them so future generations would remember that compassion itself was worth passing down. As they quietly walked back toward the sunlight pouring through the main atrium, Velis realized she had stopped searching for hidden deception. Instead, she had begun searching for the reason why her own people had worked so hard to hide this truth from her. The message arrived just before sunset. Princess Velis was sitting beside the large window of her hospital room, watching the evening sky slowly transform from pale blue into shades of gold and amber, while the city lights awakened one by one beneath the horizon. The peaceful rhythm of the hospital had become strangely familiar over the past several days. Nurses greeted one another by name. Volunteers delivered fresh flowers to patients who had no visitors. Somewhere down the hallway, someone quietly played an old piano, allowing gentle melodies to drift through the building like warm light. For the first time in many years, Velis realized she had gone several hours without feeling afraid. A soft chime interrupted the silence. Every display screen inside the room illuminated at once. Nathan, who had been reviewing tomorrow's discharge recommendations near the doorway, immediately looked toward the central monitor. Instead of hospital information, an unfamiliar emblem slowly appeared across the screen. A silver star enclosed within a circle of crystal branches. Velis felt every muscle in her body become still. She recognized the royal crest instantly. The transmission connected automatically. A calm female voice filled the room. Priority communication from the Asterian Dominion. Nathan quietly stepped toward the exit. I can leave if you would prefer privacy. Velis looked at him for a brief moment before answering. No, please stay. The request surprised both of them. The screen brightened. An elderly counselor dressed in formal silver robes appeared against the backdrop of the Dominion Senate chamber. His expression remained composed, but his eyes immediately softened with visible relief. Your Highness, he said respectfully, the stars have guided you safely. Velis nodded slowly. I am recovering. Excellent, the counselor replied. Our diplomatic vessel has already entered your system. We will arrive tomorrow morning to escort you home. Nathan quietly remained near the doorway without speaking. The counselor continued. We trust the humans have treated you according to interstellar medical agreements. Velis glanced toward Nathan almost instinctively before answering. They have treated me with kindness. A nearly invisible pause followed. That is encouraging, the counselor replied carefully. However, Your Highness must remember that human behavior is often carefully calculated. Their compassion is a diplomatic instrument designed to influence perception. The words settled heavily inside the room. Only a week earlier, Velis would have accepted them without hesitation. Now they collided painfully with every memory she had gathered inside the hospital. The little girl who had drawn her a picture, the elderly man feeding birds beside an alien stranger, the photographs lining the hall of service, Nathan sleeping in an uncomfortable chair simply because he wanted to be present when she awakened. None of those moments had been arranged for political advantage. They had happened long before anyone even knew who she truly was. Your Highness, the counselor continued gently, we ask that you remain cautious. History has taught us many difficult lessons. Velis lowered her eyes. History. She had trusted history her entire life. Yet history had never mentioned volunteers carrying flowers to strangers. It had never described physicians treating every patient equally. It had never recorded children who believed friendship mattered more than species. Do you understand? The counselor finally asked. She remained silent for several seconds before answering with complete honesty. I understand that there is much I do not understand. The counselor's expression subtly changed. Concern replaced certainty. Princess, has your judgment been affected during your recovery? Velis looked directly into the camera. No. For the first time, I believe it is becoming clear. The transmission ended politely only moments later, leaving the room quiet once again. Evening shadows stretched gently across the floor while the distant piano continued playing somewhere beyond the hallway. Nathan did not immediately speak. He simply waited. Finally, Velis broke the silence. Do you know what troubles me most? Nathan shook his head. She looked out across the glowing city beyond the window. I no longer know whether I was taught history or fear wearing the mask of history. Nathan joined her beside the window, leaving respectful space between them. Together, they watched the first stars appear above Earth. And although tomorrow would bring visitors from her own world, Velis realized that the greatest journey she had taken had never crossed the distance between planets. It had crossed the invisible distance between prejudice and truth, and there was no map in the galaxy that could ever guide someone through that path except kindness itself. Morning arrived beneath a sky washed in pale silver, and the hospital carried the same calm rhythm that had slowly become familiar to Princess Velis. Nurses greeted one another with quiet smiles. Fresh flowers appeared in waiting rooms before the first visitors arrived. The scent of warm bread drifted from the small cafe on the first floor, mixing with the clean fragrance of polished floors and fresh linen. Yet beneath that peaceful routine, something invisible had changed. News of the approaching diplomatic vessel had quietly spread through the administration. No one appeared anxious. No one rushed through the corridors. The staff simply continued caring for every patient exactly as they had the day before. Nathan found Velis standing in the rooftop healing garden shortly after sunrise. Dew still rested on the leaves surrounding the stone pathways, and a gentle breeze carried the distant sound of church bells from somewhere across the city. "You are up early," he said. She smiled faintly. "I could not sleep." Nathan nodded with understanding rather than curiosity. They stood together overlooking the skyline where the first rays of sunlight reflected across glass towers. After several quiet minutes, a soft tone sounded from Nathan's wrist communicator. He glanced at the display before exhaling slowly. "Your delegation has arrived." Velis looked toward the eastern horizon. Far above the clouds, a brilliant silver point gradually descended through the morning light before expanding into the elegant silhouette of an Asterian diplomatic cruiser. Unlike military vessels, its polished hull reflected sunlight like flowing crystal. The ship remained perfectly still above the city while smaller escort craft slowly separated and descended toward the hospital landing platform. Neither Nathan nor Velis spoke during the approach. The silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt honest. Several minutes later, hospital administrators politely welcomed the visiting delegation inside a private conference room overlooking the gardens. Nathan accompanied Velis only as far as the entrance before stopping. "This meeting belongs to you," he said gently. "If you need anything, I will be nearby." She looked at him for a long moment before quietly answering, "Thank you, Nathan." It was the first time she had spoken his name. His expression softened almost imperceptibly before he stepped back, allowing her to enter alone. Inside the conference room waited the elderly counselor from the previous evening along with several diplomatic advisors dressed in elegant silver uniforms. They all bowed respectfully as Velis entered. The counselor smiled warmly. "Your Highness, we are grateful to see your recovery progressing so well. Our physicians have prepared every arrangement for your immediate return home." Velis listened without interrupting. "Your personal shuttle is ready," another advisor added. "Departure may begin within the hour." The room fell silent. Finally, Velis asked a simple question. "What do the Earth physicians recommend?" The advisors exchanged uncertain glances. The counselor answered carefully. "Human recommendations are appreciated. However, your return remains our priority." Velis remained thoughtful before standing and walking toward the wide window overlooking the hospital gardens below. She watched volunteers helping patients into the morning sunshine, while children laughed beside the fountain she had visited days earlier. She could even recognize the elderly man feeding birds at his usual bench. Nothing had changed because important visitors had arrived. Compassion had simply continued its ordinary routine. Without turning around, she asked another question. "If their doctors believe I require 2 more days of recovery before travel, should I ignore them?" No one answered immediately. The counselor finally spoke. "Your Highness, your safety is naturally our greatest concern." She turned slowly to face them. "Then allow the people who have cared for my safety since the beginning to finish their work." Surprise quietly crossed every face in the room. One advisor stepped forward. "Princess, remaining here could be misunderstood throughout the Dominion." Velis smiled gently, though sadness lingered behind her eyes. "Perhaps, but leaving before I am truly ready would mean I learned nothing during my time on Earth." The counselor studied her carefully. Has someone asked you to stay? No, she answered immediately. That is precisely why I wish to. At that very moment, Nathan remained outside in the hallway speaking with one of the physicians, completely unaware that his name had never been mentioned once inside the meeting. He had offered no persuasion, no emotional appeal, no request for gratitude. He had simply respected her freedom to choose. And as Velis looked once more through the window toward the hospital that had quietly rebuilt her understanding of humanity, she realized that the greatest kindness Nathan had ever shown her was not rescuing her from the crash or protecting her while she recovered. It was treating her as someone capable of making her own decision, even if that decision one day led her far away from him. The final piece of the truth did not come from a speech, a treaty, or even from Nathan. It came from records that no one had expected Princess Velis to read. Her recovery was nearly complete, and the physicians encouraged her to spend part of each afternoon in the hospital library, a quiet space overlooking a courtyard filled with flowering trees. The room carried the comforting scent of old paper and polished wood, blending with the soft hum of digital archives that stretched across one curved wall. Unlike the information centers inside the Dominion, access terminals here welcomed every visitor with the same simple message. Knowledge belongs to everyone. Those 4 words caught her attention before she even sat down. Nathan arrived carrying 2 small notebooks and placed one beside her. Most visitors like taking home memories that are not stored in computers, he said with a smile. Sometimes writing helps organize complicated thoughts. Velis gently touched the blank pages before looking toward the archive terminal. May I search your historical records? Nathan nodded without hesitation. Everything available to the public is open to you. She looked at him carefully. There are no restrictions? Only patient privacy, he answered. History should survive questions. After he quietly excused himself to return to work, Velis sat alone before the glowing display. Her fingers hesitated above the controls before she entered the first search. Human rescue operations involving Astrian citizens. Hundreds of reports immediately appeared. Her eyes widened. She opened the earliest file. It described a damaged merchant vessel rescued decades earlier after a navigation failure near a human colony. Every passenger had survived. The report listed names, medical treatment, and transportation home. There was no demand for payment. No political conditions. She opened another record. Human physicians had assisted an Astrian scientific expedition suffering from an unexpected illness during a deep space survey. The patients returned safely after receiving treatment. Another report described humanitarian supplies delivered after a natural disaster on an independent world allied with the Dominion. Again, there was no mention of military advantage. Only food, medicine, shelter, and volunteers. Hour after hour, she searched deeper into the archive. The stories remained remarkably consistent. Cooperation, rescue, medical assistance, diplomatic restraint. Human mistakes were documented as honestly as their successes, yet nowhere did she find evidence supporting the terrifying picture she had been taught since childhood. Instead, she found something even more unsettling. Several incidents she remembered studying at the Royal Academy appeared in completely different forms. Events presented to Dominion students as deliberate human hostility had begun with misunderstandings, navigational failures, or diplomatic disputes that both governments had eventually resolved peacefully. The facts had not disappeared. They had simply been rearranged until fear became the only possible conclusion. Velis slowly leaned back in her chair, unable to look away from the screen. The greatest shock was not discovering that humans had virtues. Every civilization possessed virtues. The shock was discovering how carefully those virtues had been erased before reaching her classroom. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. You look like someone who just found the last missing page of a very long book. Nathan stood quietly beside the window holding 2 cups of tea. She accepted one without taking her eyes from the archive. These records, she whispered. Anyone may read them. Anyone, Nathan answered. Some people agree with them. Some people argue with them. But everyone is free to examine them. She looked toward him with quiet disbelief. Back home, I believe knowledge was something our leaders protected for us. Nathan smiled, gently before replying. Maybe knowledge becomes stronger when people are trusted instead of protected from it. His words settled into the silence between them. Outside the library window, late afternoon sunlight bathed the courtyard in warm gold as visitors quietly crossed the gardens below. Life continued with its ordinary rhythm, unaware that one young princess had just watched an entire lifetime of certainty dissolve inside a peaceful room filled with books. Velis closed the final archive and rested her hand upon the notebook Nathan had given her. On the first blank page, she slowly wrote a single sentence that she knew she would carry for the rest of her life. The most dangerous lie is not the one people tell about others. It is the one they teach you to stop questioning. The morning of Princess Velis's departure arrived beneath a sky so clear that the glass towers surrounding the hospital seemed to dissolve into the blue above them. The gardens shimmered with fresh dew, and the familiar fountain reflected sunlight in thousands of tiny flashes that reminded her of stars scattered across still water. Everything looked exactly as it had on the day she first walked those paths. Only one thing had changed. Her medical clearance rested quietly inside a simple folder carried by one of the physicians. Her recovery was complete. The diplomatic delegation waited beside the landing platform while hospital staff continued their ordinary routines without ceremony. Patients still needed medicine. Children still laughed in the rehabilitation wing. Volunteers still replaced fresh flowers in every waiting room. Humanity had never paused simply because a princess was leaving. Nathan stood near the entrance holding a small paper bag. He looked exactly as he had the day she awakened beside him, wearing the same blue rescue uniform and the same expression that never asked for recognition. "Before you go," he said, handing her the bag. "Everyone wanted you to have something." Velis carefully opened it. Inside rested the drawing from the little girl, the small stuffed bear that had waited beside her bed, the blank notebook that was no longer blank, and a hospital identification bracelet that the nurses had removed the evening before. Tucked beneath them lay a folded card signed by doctors, volunteers, receptionists, maintenance workers, cafeteria cooks, ambulance crews, and nurses. Every signature carried the same short message: "Safe travels. Come back as a friend." Her eyes lingered on the words longer than she expected. "They all signed this?" she asked quietly. Nathan nodded. "You became part of the hospital family." She closed the bag gently before looking at him. "You never asked who I truly was." Nathan smiled. "You were Velis." That seemed important enough. For the first time since arriving on Earth, she no longer felt the need to hide behind titles. The delegation approached respectfully. The elderly counselor waited patiently until she turned toward him. "Your Highness," he said, "our vessel is prepared." Velis remained silent for several moments before answering. "Before we depart, I have one request." The counselor bowed slightly. "Anything." She looked toward the hospital entrance where physicians from several worlds stood together beneath the morning sun. "I want this hospital officially recognized as protected humanitarian ground by the Astrian Dominion." Every advisor exchanged surprised glances. The counselor blinked. "That would require a royal decree." "Then prepare one." Her voice remained calm, but every word carried quiet certainty. "No rescue team. No physician. No hospital that treats strangers without asking their species should ever be considered an enemy by our people again." Silence settled across the landing platform. Finally, the elderly counselor lowered his head. "It shall be done." Nathan looked at her with genuine surprise. "That is a very large decision." Velis smiled softly. "Large lies require equally large corrections." Hours later, aboard the diplomatic cruiser, she stood before the Dominion Senate through a live interstellar transmission. Millions watched across countless worlds expecting a routine report about her rescue. Instead, they witnessed something no royal had ever done before. Velis held up the child's drawing for everyone to see. "I was taught that humans smile too." "Deceive," she said calmly. "The first human I met fell asleep in an uncomfortable chair because he refused to leave a frightened stranger alone. I was taught that human hospitals exist to gather intelligence. Instead, I found halls filled with ordinary people who saved lives without asking whose flag those lives belonged to. I was taught that compassion was a disguise. I now know compassion is their identity." No one interrupted. Even the vast Senate chamber remained completely silent. "Everything I had been told about humans was a lie," she continued. "Not because humans are perfect. They are not. They make mistakes, they disagree, and they struggle like every civilization. But they taught me something our history never did. Fear asks who deserves kindness. Humanity simply offers it. Within weeks, the royal decree was ratified. Dominion History Academies began revising decades of educational material. Student exchange programs with Earth quietly replaced old military simulation exercises. The first joint medical mission launched only 6 months later, carrying physicians from both civilizations beneath one shared emblem of healing. Nearly a year afterward, Nathan finished another long rescue shift and walked through the familiar hospital garden before heading home. Near the fountain stood a newly planted tree with silver leaves unlike any species native to Earth. Beneath it rested a polished stone engraved in 2 languages. It read, "Friendship began here because one princess chose to believe what she saw instead of what she was told." Nathan smiled quietly before continuing toward the entrance where another rescue call had already arrived. Above him, the silver leaves caught the afternoon sunlight and shimmered against the blue sky, while somewhere far beyond the clouds, on worlds that had once feared humanity, children now opened newly printed history books containing a picture of a human hospital instead of a human battlefield, and for the first time in generations, they learned that the strongest force in the galaxy had never been power. It had been kindness.